The photograph wasn't supposed to show anything. At least, that's what we all believed when we first took it, just a harmless picture. One of dozens we snapped that afternoon, meant to document nothing more than an empty stretch of road and the strange quiet that hung over that place like a forgotten memory. But something was wrong from the beginning, long before we developed the film, long before we saw the shape standing where no one had been. Something about that abandoned area felt too still, too expectant, as if it had been waiting for us. I didn't know that day would change anything. None of us did. We were just three friends on a weekend outing, looking for old buildings to photograph, chasing that nostalgic, analog vibe everyone seems to love now. Film cameras, dusty textures, soft grain. Those keywords alone were enough to make our social media pages look aesthetic. But the real reason we chose that spot wasn't for trends or filters. It was curiosity, the kind that pulls you toward places you should probably avoid. There's something strange about places that seem untouched yet unsettling, and that road was exactly that kind of place. Quiet, old, and somehow heavier than it should have been. The forest around it felt too tall, the air too still, like the whole scene had been paused by someone pressing a button that we couldn't see. Even the wind didn't seem interested in moving. It was the type of silence that makes you whisper without meaning to, the type that makes you feel watched even when you know no one is around. Or you think you know. I remember the first moment clearly, because it wasn't dramatic or loud. It was just a small thing, a feeling. I lifted my camera, adjusted the focus, and pointed the lens down the empty road. A straight path, cracked asphalt, sunlight filtering through tall trees. That's all. But the second I looked through the viewfinder, I felt a faint pressure behind my ribs. Not pain, just pressure. Like the camera itself was trying to warn me about something it could see, something I couldn't yet. I lowered the camera and looked with my eyes instead. Nothing. Just the road. Just the trees. Just sunlight. Normal. But the moment I put the camera back up, that pressure returned. Soft yet unmistakable. I ignored it because it didn't make sense, and at that time, we were laughing, teasing each other, trying to get the perfect aesthetic shot for our upcoming video. The title we planned for that video was something like Exploring Forgotten Places That Have Been Left Behind. Kind of dramatic, kind of mysterious, the type that does well on YouTube. The kind that gets people to click. We didn't know how much heavier that forgotten part truly was. We didn't know that some places aren't forgotten naturally. Sometimes they're avoided. I took the picture anyway. One click. A simple shutter sound. Nothing special. But later, when we developed the film, it wasn't simple anymore. The strange thing is, nothing bad happened right away. After taking that photo, the day continued like normal. We joked around, took a few more shots, ate snacks in the car, and talked about random things. Everything was fine. Everything felt like any other weekend adventure. We had no clue that one of the images we captured wasn't like the others. But looking back now, I can't shake the feeling that the place had been aware of us. Like it knew we were going to carry a piece of it back home. Like it knew exactly what it wanted us to see. The three of us, me, Rafi, and Sana, had been exploring old locations together for months. It was our little hobby, our escape from routine. Every place had a story, and we enjoyed uncovering it. But this wasn't like the other spots we'd visited. Usually, abandoned buildings had broken windows, faded graffiti, or old footprints. There were always signs that someone had passed through recently. But this place had nothing. No footprints. No tire marks. No trash. No sound. Nothing. When we got home that evening and started developing the film in Rafi's little darkroom setup, we weren't expecting anything strange. Honestly, we were more worried about whether the shots would come out too overexposed, because the sunlight had been annoyingly bright. But as the first photo slowly appeared on the paper, something wasn't right. At first, the image looked completely normal, just like I remembered it. The empty road, the tall trees, the soft golden light. The kind of peaceful, dreamy scene that people love putting as their phone wallpaper. But then Rafi leaned closer and squinted. "Wait, was someone standing there?" he asked. I frowned. "Where?" He pointed to the far end of the road, where the sunlight blurred slightly. I stepped closer, feeling a strange chill crawl up my spine even though we were safely in his room. The shape was faint, very faint, but it was definitely there. A figure. A person. Someone standing exactly where we had been certain no one was. We didn't see anyone that day. Not a single person. At first, we thought it was just a glitch, maybe a light reflection or a shadow caused by the trees. Film sometimes plays tricks like that. But as the image darkened further, the shape became clearer. Not fully clear, just enough to prove it wasn't a mistake. It was a silhouette. Human. Still. Tall. And it shouldn't have been there. Sanaa backed away from the table, hugging her arms. We didn't see anyone. I would have noticed. Her voice was quiet, unusually so. She was always the brave one, always the first to walk into an abandoned room, or the first to suggest exploring deeper. Seeing her unsettled made the room feel colder. Rafi tried to laugh it off at first. Maybe someone walked by and we didn't see. But his laugh didn't reach his eyes. He knew as well as we did, nobody walked by. There was no sound, no movement, nothing. If there had been someone, we would have noticed. That place was so silent that even the slightest movement echoed in your mind. Still, none of us said the obvious thing out loud. Not yet. Because that would make it real. We developed the next photos. But they were normal. Trees. Road. Us posing with fake serious expressions. A close-up of an old wooden sign. The usual stuff. But every time the first photo caught our eyes again, that figure seemed to feel heavier, like its presence wasn't limited to the picture. As if it was pressing gently against the edges of the image, waiting to be acknowledged. I forced myself to breathe normally, but my chest felt tight. It wasn't fear exactly. It was confusion mixed with something else, something like dread. The kind you feel when you realize something doesn't add up, something you can't explain in a comfortable way. Rafi kept staring at the photograph like he expected the figure to move. The room felt too quiet again, too similar to the silence from the road. I could almost feel that same pressure behind my ribs, the one I felt when taking the picture. Sanaa finally whispered, "Do you think the camera saw something we didn't?" The question shouldn't have been scary. Cameras capture things all the time, light, shadows, reflections. But the way she asked it made my stomach twist. Because deep down, I had already been thinking the same thing. And that pressure I felt earlier suddenly made sense in a way I didn't want to acknowledge. Sometimes cameras catch things the human I can't process fast enough. Sometimes lenses capture moments that exist a little outside our awareness. And sometimes, very rarely, they catch something that isn't supposed to be there. Rafi swallowed hard. Maybe it's a person. Maybe someone was far down the road and we missed it. He didn't believe himself. We could all hear it. But we didn't want to consider the alternative. The problem was, the figure didn't look like it was walking or passing by. It looked like it was standing. Still. Facing us. Exactly centered. As if it knew where the camera was aimed. I tried to brush off the idea. Maybe the person had been standing at an angle we didn't notice. Maybe they appeared after we looked away. Maybe anything. But none of the explanations fit. None of them felt honest. The more we stared, the more uncomfortable we felt. Something about the figure didn't match the lighting properly. It wasn't a glitch, but it wasn't natural either. It looked like it belonged in the image, yet somehow didn't. The shadows were slightly off, the edges too faint. Like it was there, but not fully part of the world we stood in. After a moment that felt longer than it really was, Sanaa whispered, almost to herself, "It wasn't there when we were looking." The room went silent again. And that's when it happened. The lights in Rafi's room flickered. Just for a second. But it was enough to make all three of us freeze. Enough to remind us of that unnatural stillness in the forest. Enough to make the photograph on the table feel suddenly darker. For a moment, I thought I saw the silhouette shift slightly. Of course, that was impossible. Photos don't move. But the feeling stayed, like we were no longer alone in that small, dim room. Like the photograph wasn't just an image anymore. Like something had been carried back with us when the shutter clicked. A faint shiver crawled up my spine, and I felt the tiny hairs on my arms rise. The room felt heavier, harder to breathe in. Rafi reached out slowly and pulled the photo closer, but his hand trembled slightly each time the lights buzzed. Maybe it was all in our heads. Maybe we were just tired, overthinking, letting imagination twist a harmless picture into something eerie. But then Rafi whispered something that made my stomach drop. "Look at its feet," he said. I leaned in, feeling that same pressure tighten. Sanaa hesitated, but eventually moved closer too. The figure had no shadow, not even the faintest trace. It was standing in a place where the sunlight hit directly, yet the ground beneath it remained untouched, bright and empty. Like the figure was floating an inch above the road, or like it wasn't fully there. We didn't speak after that. There was nothing to say. The silence in the room grew thicker, and I swear I felt the same sensation from a forest, the feeling of being watched, of being observed quietly by something that didn't need to breathe. And the photograph, it suddenly felt wrong to touch, as if it didn't belong to us, as if we had captured something that never wanted to be seen. Rafi cleared his throat, trying to act normal, but his voice was soft. Let's just put away for now. Maybe it's just a weird exposure thing. We can look at it tomorrow." But we all knew none of us wanted to see it again. Still, tomorrow wasn't the problem. Tonight was. Because as we turned away, as we tried to distract ourselves with normal conversation, something in the room shifted. Just slightly. A subtle movement of air. A faint sound. The kind of thing you notice only when you're already on edge. And when I glanced back at the table, the photograph wasn't exactly where we had left it. It had slid just a few centimeters, but enough to make my breath catch. Enough to make my heart thrum against my chest. Enough for me to know, with absolute certainty, whatever had been in that empty road wasn't just in the photograph anymore. And it wasn't finished with us. Not yet. The moment I noticed the photograph had moved, my breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. Maybe it had slipped when we turned away. Maybe the table wasn't perfectly level. Those were the reasonable explanations, the ones that made sense. But none of them matched what I felt twisting inside my chest. It was that same quiet pressure from earlier, the same sense of something standing too close, too silent, too aware. I stared at the photo for a few seconds longer, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But the room felt different now, heavier, as if the air had thickened. Rafi and Sanaa were talking softly behind me, trying to distract themselves with some random topic, but their voices sounded far away. I swallowed, forcing myself to step back toward them. "Everything okay?" Sanaa asked. Her tone was light, but her eyes weren't. She had noticed my expression. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." Tired was easier to explain than the truth, that I had felt something shift in the room, something that wasn't supposed to be there. And I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. We tried to move on with the evening, but none of us could relax. Even the warm yellow light in the room felt colder, somehow. Rafi kept glancing toward the table every few minutes. Sanaa hugged her knees and stared at the floor like she was replaying the scene in her head over and over. There was a kind of quiet that didn't feel natural. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that makes your skin tingle, like the silence is hiding something behind it. After a while, Rafi exhaled and leaned back in his chair. "We need a break," he said. "Let's go to the kitchen, get something to drink." None of us argued. The idea of stepping out of the darkroom felt like a relief. We walked into the hallway, and the shift was immediate. The lighting felt warmer again, the air easier to breathe. It reminded me how different the atmosphere had been in that room, how wrong it had felt the moment the figure appeared during development. We gathered around the kitchen counter, each of us trying to act normal as we poured water into glasses. Sanaa finally broke the pause. "I know you guys are going to think I'm overreacting," she said softly, "but I don't think that silhouette was a person." Rafi froze mid-sip. I didn't speak. She continued. "I kept thinking about the way it stood. It wasn't natural. It was like it didn't have weight." "People don't float," Rafi muttered, half joking, half nervous. "That's not what I'm saying," Sanaa replied. "It looked out of place, like it wasn't part of our world." Her words made something inside me clench, because she had unknowingly said the exact thing I had been afraid to admit. The figure didn't look like someone who happened to be walking nearby. It didn't look like a person at all. It looked like an outline of something that hadn't fully formed, like a faint trace of presence. I didn't want to make her more scared, so I shook my head. It could still be a camera issue, I said quietly. Film is unpredictable. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. Film doesn't create human shapes out of nothing. It doesn't create watchers in empty roads. And it definitely doesn't shift photographs on its own. A soft hum filled the kitchen, the refrigerator cooling cycle kicking in, and it made us all flinch. That's how on edge we were. The smallest noise felt amplified. Rafi put his glass down and rubbed his forehead. Okay, he said. Let's think logically. If the figure wasn't there in real life, then it could have been a light reflection, or maybe someone really far away that we didn't notice. Sanaa gave him a look. You don't believe that. He opened his mouth to argue, but shut it again. The three of us stood in silence, each thinking our own unsettling thoughts. It was then that I remembered something. Something small, something I hadn't thought about earlier because it felt too subtle. When I took the photo, I said slowly, I felt weird. Both of them looked at me. Weird how? Rafi asked. Like pressure. In my chest. Not pain, just a feeling. Like something didn't want me to take the picture. I hesitated. It went away when I lowered the camera. Sanaa's eyes widened. Why didn't you say that earlier? Because it sounded stupid, I admitted. Like I was overthinking. Rafi didn't react right away. He stared at the countertop, his expression tightening. I felt something too, he said quietly. But not when you took the picture. He hesitated. When it developed. What did you feel? Sanaa whispered. He shrugged weakly. Pressure. Same as you. Like the room got heavier. I blinked, suddenly cold. We had all felt something. At different moments. At different intensities. But all connected to that single photograph. Sanaa wrapped her arms around herself. We should have never taken that picture. The sentence hung in the air between us, heavy and honest. For a long moment, no one spoke. The kitchen light flickered slightly, just once, and all our heads turned, too fast, too reactive. But the light stayed steady after that. Maybe it was normal. Maybe. We need to look again, Rafi finally said. His voice was shaky but determined. We can't just ignore it. Sanaa shook her head. Why? What good will that do? Because, he said, we need to know if it's just one picture. That thought hadn't crossed my mind yet, but when he said it, my stomach twisted. What if it wasn't the only one? What if the figure, or whatever it was, appeared again in another frame? Maybe closer, maybe clearer, maybe more real. We didn't speak as we walked back toward the darkroom. Each step felt heavier than the last. I didn't want to see that photo again. But I also knew I had to. Because avoiding it wouldn't make whatever was happening disappear. The hallway felt colder this time. Not freezing, just subtly off, like a draft of air was moving even though the windows were shut. The closer we got to the darkroom, the slower we walked. Something about the door felt wrong. Rafi opened it carefully. The room looked the same as before. Same soft red glow. Same table. Same chemicals. Same developed photos scattered across the drying line. Except for one thing. The photograph with the figure? It wasn't on the table anymore. Sanaa gasped. Rafi froze. I felt my heartbeat lurch painfully. The photo hadn't fallen. It hadn't slipped. It was gone. We scanned the room, quickly. Under the table. On the floor. Behind the tray. Nothing. There was nowhere for it to go. It was a small room with bare surfaces, no vents or gaps where something could disappear. Yet the photograph had vanished. This doesn't make sense, Rafi whispered. But his voice didn't sound surprised, just scared. I didn't answer. My throat was dry. Sanaa backed up until her shoulders hit the wall. It moved earlier, she said. You saw it. I didn't want to say anything, but it moved. I stared at her. You saw it? When? When we were leaving the room, she said quietly. It slid a little. I thought maybe I imagined it. My chest tightened. All three of us had noticed something. None of us wanted to admit it alone. Now that we had, the fear settled deeper, more real. We didn't speak as we walked back toward the darkroom. Each step felt heavier than the last. I didn't want to see that photo again, but I also knew I had to, because avoiding it wouldn't make whatever was happening disappear. The hallway felt colder this time. Not freezing, just subtly off, like a draft of air was moving even though the windows were shut. The closer we got to the darkroom, the slower we walked. Something about the door felt wrong. Rafi opened it carefully. The room looked the same as before. Same soft red glow. Same table. Same chemicals. Same developed photos scattered across the drying line. Except for one thing. The photograph with the figure? It wasn't on the table anymore. Sanaa gasped. Rafi froze. I felt my heartbeat lurch painfully. The photo hadn't fallen. It hadn't slipped. It was gone. We scanned the room quickly. Under the table. On the floor. Behind the tray. Nothing. There was nowhere for it to go. It was a small room with bare surfaces, no vents or gaps where something could disappear. Yet the photograph had vanished. This doesn't make sense, Rafi whispered. But his voice didn't sound surprised, just scared. I didn't answer. My throat was dry. Sanaa backed up until her shoulders hit the wall. It moved earlier, she said. You saw it. I didn't want to say anything, but it moved. I stared at her. You saw it? When? When we were leaving the room, she said quietly. It slid a little. I thought maybe I imagined it. My chest tightened. All three of us had noticed something. None of us wanted to admit it alone. Now that we had, the fear settled deeper, more real. We stood in the dim red room, listening to our own breaths, scanning the space repeatedly, even though we already knew we wouldn't find anything. Then, suddenly, Rafi turned around sharply. What? I asked. I thought I heard something, he whispered. We listened. A faint sound drifted from somewhere deeper in the house. Not footsteps. Not movement. More like the soft, thin rustle of paper sliding across a surface. We looked at each other. None of us moved. The sound came again, just barely. Like the whisper of a page turning. Sanaa shook her head hard. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Rafi swallowed. It's coming from the living room. We didn't want to follow the sound. Every instinct told us to leave, to go outside, to go anywhere but toward the noise. But something pulled us forward. Curiosity mixed with dread. The need to know what was happening. We walked slowly down the hallway, the air getting colder with every step. The living room was dark, only a faint glow coming from the streetlights outside. The sound stopped the moment we reached the doorway. We stepped inside. For a second, everything looked normal. Then Sanaa pointed with a shaking hand. There on the coffee table, lying perfectly centered, was the photograph. Except now, the figure wasn't standing at the far end of the road anymore. It was closer, much closer. And this time, the shape wasn't faint. It was solid, detailed, facing directly toward the camera. And its head was tilted slightly, as if it had been watching us the whole time. If you want the next part, just say continue. The photograph on the coffee table didn't look like the one we had seen earlier. The road was the same, the trees the same, but the figure, it had changed. It was no longer distant or blurry. Now it stood maybe 10 or 12 steps away from the camera's point of view, as if it had taken several quiet, measured strides forward. The shape was sharper, more defined. I could make out shoulders, the outline of arms, and a slight tilt of the head that suggested awareness, like it was studying us just as we were studying it. We didn't speak for several seconds. It was as if the room itself held its breath. Then Rafi whispered, "It shouldn't be moving." The fear in his voice echoed a truth we all felt but didn't want to accept. Photos don't change. They don't shift. They don't update themselves. And they definitely don't show progress, step by step, as if someone or something was coming closer. Sanaa backed up until she reached the wall, her hands trembling. "We're not imagining this, right?" she asked. "Tell me we're not losing it." I didn't answer. Because the moment I looked at that photograph, I felt it again, the same pressure in my chest, like something was standing right behind me even though I knew nothing was there. It was the same sensation from the road, the same one from the darkroom. A quiet, heavy presence. Rafi took a hesitant step toward the photo, but didn't touch it. "It followed us," he said softly. The words sent a chill through me. Followed. The idea that something from the road had attached itself to the image, or worse, had used the image to enter our space, our safe space, felt surreal. But the evidence was right in front of us. "We need to stop looking at it," Sanaa muttered. "We need to get rid of it." But something in me resisted that idea. Not because I wanted to keep the photo, every instinct screamed to throw it away, but because part of me feared what might happen if we did. The photograph felt like a connection, a window. Destroying it without understanding, it seemed risky, like breaking something fragile that might lash out if handled wrong. "We don't even know what it is," I said quietly. "Or what it wants." Sanaa stared at me. Why would it want anything? It shouldn't exist. Rafi let out a shaky breath and ran a hand through his hair. Let's sit down for a minute. We need to think." We sat in the living room, keeping distance between ourselves and the photograph, though none of us let it out of our sight. The shadows in the room felt longer, stretching strangely across the floor, as if they were leaning closer. The night outside was quiet, too quiet, as if the world held its breath with us. After a moment, Rafi spoke again. "There's something I didn't tell you guys." Both Sanaa and I looked at him. "About that place," he added. My stomach tightened. "What about it?" "When I was searching for abandoned locations," he said carefully, "I came across a forum post about that area. Someone mentioned strange things happening there. Photos showing stuff that wasn't actually there. Weird shadows." Sanaa's eyebrows furrowed. "And you didn't tell us?" "I thought it was some internet creepypasta," he said defensively. "People say anything online to sound mysterious." "But it wasn't just a random story," he added. "There were comments from other people agreeing, saying that the road had some history, something about an old incident. They said visitors sometimes felt watched." The word "watched" made something cold settle in my spine. "What incident?" I asked. Rafi shook his head. The post didn't explain much, just that the road used to lead to a small settlement decades ago. But the area was cleared out after something happened. A disappearance, I think. Sanaa looked pale. "And you thought that would be a fun spot for pictures?" "I didn't think it was real," he argued. "I didn't want to freak you guys out over some made-up story." I leaned back, trying to piece the information together. Keywords from that forum echoed in my mind. Abandoned road, missing person, strange photograph, unexplained presence. It all aligned too well with what we were experiencing. "So you think whatever happened there," I paused, choosing my words carefully, "is connected to this?" "I don't know," he whispered. "But something's wrong." We all knew that much. Sanaa pulled her knees up to her chest and stared at the floor. "Maybe we should go back," she said suddenly. Rafi blinked. "Go back? You want to return to the place where we took that picture?" "Not alone," she added quickly. "But maybe seeing the area again will help us understand what's happening. Maybe it's tied to something physical there. A sign, an object, something we missed." I shook my head slowly. "Or maybe going back will make it worse." "That's the problem," Sanaa said. "We don't know what's safe and what's dangerous. We don't know anything." Her voice cracked slightly, and I realized how scared she truly was. I was scared too. "We need more information," she continued. "That forum, can you find it again? Maybe there were more posts, more details." Rafi nodded. "I'll try." He grabbed his laptop and opened it, tapping quickly, searching for the thread he had mentioned. The screen's soft glow was the only source of light besides the streetlights outside. The atmosphere felt charged, like a storm building without wind. While he searched, I stood quietly and walked toward the window. I didn't know why, I just needed to look outside to reassure myself that the world was still normal. But when I peered through the glass, my breath hitched. The road outside Rafi's house was empty, lit by faint orange streetlights. Normal. But in the far corner, near the shadows of the trees, I thought I saw something. A shape. Still. Standing just beyond the light. I blinked rapidly. When I looked again, it was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. I turned slowly, my heartbeat pounding. "Guys," I whispered. "I think something's outside." Sanaa's head snapped up. What do you mean outside? I saw something near the trees, I said. It looked like... I stopped myself. Saying it out loud made it feel too real. Rafi stood and moved beside me, squinting through the glass. I don't see anything. Maybe it moved, I whispered. Or maybe I imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. Rafi sat back down, trying to shake off the tension. I found the forum. We gathered around the laptop. The page was old, with washed-out text and posts from years ago. Rafi scrolled slowly. Here. This is the one. He read aloud, though his voice was tight. People say the road holds memories. Some believe the place keeps impressions of those who vanished there. Photos taken in the area sometimes reveal shapes or figures not seen by the naked eye. He paused, swallowing hard. If you capture something that shouldn't be there, don't keep the photograph in your home. The sentence made my skin crawl. Sanaa whispered, Why? What happens if you keep it? Rafi scrolled down for the reply. The next comment was vague, written by a different user. The figure doesn't stay in the picture. It gets closer. We all froze. The room felt colder. The pressure in my chest returned. My mind replayed the image on the coffee table. The way the figure stood closer, clearer, more defined. Like it was stepping into our space 1 inch at a time. Sanaa slowly looked toward the table again. I don't want to turn around, she whispered. Rafi stood up shakily. We can't run from it. We have to see. All three of us turned toward the photograph at the same time. And the moment our eyes landed on it, it had changed again. The figure wasn't 10 steps away anymore. It wasn't even on the road. Now it stood at the very front of the frame, only inches from where the camera would have been held. Close enough to see the outline of a head. Close enough to see the curve of shoulders. Close enough that it felt like if we reached out, it might reach back. If you want the next part, just say continue. The air in the abandoned station felt different now. Heavier, almost humming, with a quiet pressure that crawled under the skin. We kept moving down the narrow corridor, our steps slow and careful, trying not to disturb whatever watched us from the dark. The lights above flickered again, but this time they stayed dim, as if something was draining the power on purpose. I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my ears, and every echo felt like it belonged to someone else walking right behind us. Junaid kept glancing over his shoulder, whispering that he felt we weren't alone. I wanted to tell him he was imagining things, but the truth was I felt the same. The place wasn't just abandoned, it felt aware. Every small sound, every shift in the air carried weight, the kind that makes a person wish they had never stepped inside. Still, we pressed forward, partly because we had come too far to turn back, and partly because something ahead seemed to be pulling us in. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe fear, maybe something we didn't understand. As we reached the lower platform, the temperature dropped suddenly. Our breath turned faint and visible in front of us. The silence grew sharper. Even the soft hum of the old wires had stopped. It was like the station was holding its breath. A strange pattern was scratched across the wall. Symbols we had never seen before, curved lines layered over each other like they were trying to hide a message. They glowed faintly, almost alive, and the closer we stepped, the more uneasy we felt. It didn't look natural, not even close. I moved my flashlight slowly across the platform, and that's when I saw it, footprints. Fresh ones. They led toward the tunnel, disappearing into the pitch-black passage where the tracks vanished into nothingness. The tunnel looked like it had been swallowed by darkness, as if it wasn't just dark, but hollow and waiting. We exchanged looks, both unsure whether to follow, but something about the prints felt urgent, like they belonged to someone who had been running from something. Right as we were deciding our next move, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath us. Dust drifted from the ceiling. A distant metallic screech echoed from the tunnel, long strained, like something dragging across the tracks. It grew louder, closer, until it almost sounded like breathing. We froze, barely daring to move, listening as the sound scraped its way through the darkness toward us. My mind raced with every possibility, none of them comforting. And then the lights overhead buzzed violently, flickering in a rapid pulse. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting and shifting, as if they were being pulled by something unseen. Junaid grabbed my arm, quietly urging me to stay calm, but his voice trembled. The whole platform felt like it was bracing for something we couldn't see, but could feel approaching, something that had been waiting for us the entire time. We stepped back slowly, keeping our eyes on the tunnel. The dragging sound halted abruptly, leaving a heavy silence that somehow felt worse. The air grew tighter, pressing close around us. I could sense it now. Whatever was inside that tunnel was no longer standing still. It was aware of us. It was listening. And right before I could speak, a dim glow appeared deep within the darkness, like a pair of distant eyes opening for the first time. We didn't run. We couldn't. The suspense held us in place as the glow grew brighter, pulsing slowly, rising like something enormous was beginning to move. Everything in me screamed that the climax of this nightmare was coming. But we weren't there yet. Not even close. The glow inside the tunnel didn't fade. It swelled, slowly stretching outward, like something massive was waking up. But as we backed away, trying to stay quiet, I noticed something strange. The symbols on the wall behind us began to pulse in the same rhythm as the light in the tunnel. It was almost like they were connected, reacting to each other, communicating in a way we couldn't understand. The hairs on my arms rose. Something bigger was happening here, something we hadn't even begun to grasp. Junaid whispered that we needed to leave, but before we could move, the temperature shifted again, this time rising sharply. A wave of heat rolled across the platform, followed by a deep vibration that felt like it was coming from inside the walls. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and dust poured down from the ceiling like falling ash. It wasn't just one thing awakening. Something else was being triggered at the same time. And then we heard it, footsteps. Not from the tunnel, from behind us. Slow, steady, unmistakable. We turned around, expecting to see another person trapped down here, but there was no one. The footsteps kept echoing, circling us, as if an invisible presence was pacing around the platform. Junaid's breathing grew shaky, and mine wasn't any better. The station felt like it had come alive, like every corner was watching us, waiting for something to happen. But the real shock came a second later. The fresh footprints we had seen earlier, the ones leading into the tunnel, began appearing again, one after another. Only this time, the steps were forming right in front of us, as if someone unseen was walking forward. The prints moved across the dusty floor, heading straight toward the glowing tunnel. But then they stopped halfway, and suddenly they turned back toward us. My throat tightened. The invisible footsteps were now walking in our direction. But before we could react, the glow inside the tunnel suddenly split into two. Not eyes, two separate lights, two shapes, two presences. Whatever was inside, the darkness wasn't alone. And both of them were moving toward the platform now, their faint glow growing brighter, clearer, casting long shadows across the walls. The symbols behind us pulsed harder, almost warning us, almost urging us to run, but our legs refused to move. The invisible steps grew louder, faster, closing the distance with a speed that didn't feel human. It was like the unseen figure was trying to reach us before whatever was in the tunnel did. The pressure in the air kept rising, building like a storm ready to break. The whole station trembled again, and somewhere deep inside the walls, a sharp metallic snap echoed, like something ancient had finally cracked open. Junaid grabbed my sleeve, eyes wide, whispering that this wasn't just a haunting or a mystery. It was a trap, one that had been waiting for someone to stumble into it. A system of signs, echoes, and forces we had triggered without realizing. The glowing shapes in the tunnel were now close enough that we could see faint outlines, tall, distorted, shifting like mist struggling to take form. And the invisible footsteps stopped right behind us. I could feel the cold breath of something standing inches away. Then, out of nowhere, the entire corridor behind the platform lit up with the same pulsing glow as the symbols, revealing a narrow passage we hadn't noticed before. It had been hidden, sealed, concealed beneath layers of dust and shadow. And now it was open, as if inviting us or warning us. This was the second twist. The conflict wasn't coming from one direction. It was closing in from all sides. And the real danger, the one we hadn't even seen yet, was waiting in that newly awakened passage, breathing quietly in the dark, aware that we had finally noticed it. The climax was coming. But for now, all we could do was stand frozen as the trap continued to tighten around us. The footsteps behind us stopped so suddenly that the silence felt heavier than the sound. I didn't turn around at first. I couldn't. My body was locked in place, caught between the glowing shapes moving toward us from the tunnel and the cold, invisible presence standing right at our backs. Junaid whispered my name, barely a breath, but it was enough to push me out of that frozen state. I forced myself to look. There was nothing there. Nothing. And yet the dust on the floor was disturbed, pressed down in the clear shape of feet. The air around that space shimmered just a little, like heat rising off asphalt. It wasn't a shadow or a figure, more like a faint distortion of reality itself. Almost human, but not fully formed. The kind of shape you see in a damaged photograph. The kind that makes you wonder if the camera caught something the eye never could. That's when everything clicked. The photograph with no one in it, until we developed it. The strange figure that appeared in the picture even though no one had been standing there. The blurred edges around the shape. The way it seemed half caught, half present. What we were seeing now was the same thing. The same presence. Only this time, it wasn't trapped on film. The glowing shapes from the tunnel moved closer, their forms shifting like they were made of smoke and memory. They weren't coming for us, not directly. They stopped at the edge of the platform and seemed to face the invisible figure behind us, pulsing softly like they were signaling something. The symbols on the walls glowed in response, almost syncing the tunnel lights with the presence behind us. It felt like we had walked straight into a conversation between things that shouldn't exist. Junaid whispered that we needed to move, to run, to get out of the station while we still could. But the way out was behind the shimmering figure. The glowing passage that had opened in the wall earlier was now dimming, like the window had been closing slowly this whole time. The pressure in the air tightened again. The glow intensified. The presence behind us stepped forward. Except this time, instead of fear, something else washed over me. Recognition. A strange calm I couldn't explain. Like I had sensed this figure before, long before the photograph, long before the abandoned station. A memory brushed my mind, a blurred childhood moment, standing in a room with my father's camera equipment, watching a distorted shape appear on a test print by accident. A mistake, he had called it. A light leak, he explained. But now I wondered if he had known more. The invisible figure finally solidified enough for us to see the faint outline of a face, still blurred, still shifting, but human enough to recognize emotion. Not anger, not threat. It looked sad. The glowing shapes in the tunnel pulsed harder, almost impatiently. The ground trembled again, but this time it didn't feel like danger. It felt like something was being released, something old and trapped. A low hum filled the station, vibrating through the rails, the walls, even our bones. And then everything happened at once. The glowing shapes surged forward, not toward us, but toward the invisible figure. The presence behind us stepped fully into the light from the tunnel, and suddenly the entire platform lit up with a white flash, so bright it erased everything for a second. When my vision returned, the glowing shapes were gone. The presence was gone. And for a moment, the station felt completely normal. Quiet. Still. Empty. Junaid looked at me, trying to understand what just happened. But I had no words. It felt like whatever conflict had been building, whatever tension had been rising, had just released itself in that burst of light. The air was lighter. The station no longer trembled. The symbols on the wall had gone dim again, lifeless and cold. We climbed the stairs back toward the surface, half expecting something to pull us back down. But nothing did. The wind outside felt fresh, almost too normal after everything we had seen. For a moment, it really felt like the nightmare was over. But the final twist came when we reached the street. The old camera shop, the one where we had originally developed that strange photograph, was lit from inside, even though it had been closed for years. The door was cracked open, and the faint smell of chemical developer drifted out. On the counter, under a soft yellow lamp, sat a single photo print. Face down. Junaid froze. I stepped closer, my heart beating hard enough to feel in my throat. When I flipped the photo over, my hands went cold. It was a picture of us, standing on the underground platform, looking terrified. But we weren't alone. Behind us, clearer than ever, stood the fully formed figure the camera had captured before. No blur, no distortion, not invisible anymore. It was standing upright, facing us, its hand resting lightly on my shoulder. And at the bottom of the photo, something new was printed in faint, almost handwritten text. Not the last time. The conflict in the station might have ended, but something had followed us. And the real story, the one behind the photograph, was only just beginning. The lights inside the old camera shop flickered gently as we stood frozen, staring at the photograph with the figure standing behind us. Even though everything else had felt unreal down in that abandoned station, this picture grounded the fear in a way that nothing else had. It wasn't a trick of the shadows. It wasn't dust on a lens. It wasn't our imagination running wild. Something had followed us, just like the message said. And now, standing in the quiet glow of the old shop, everything we had tried to push aside hit us all at once. Junaid kept glancing at the door, like he expected the figure to appear any second. But nothing moved in the shop except for the soft sway of the dusty curtains near the counter. The air felt strangely calm, as if whatever presence had been haunting us was giving us space to understand. For the first time, I felt like this wasn't about danger. It was about communication. A warning, maybe, or a story that had taken years to reach the surface. I set the photo back on the counter and noticed that the chemicals and equipment were neatly arranged, not abandoned the way we had remembered them. The enlarger was warm, like someone had been using it recently. Each tray still had faint ripples in the liquid. But the shop had been closed for years. Everyone in town knew that. The owner had moved away, and no one had touched the place since. It hit me then that maybe the shop didn't reopen for us. Maybe it reopened because of what we brought with us. I walked deeper into the room, feeling a strange pull toward the back wall, where framed old photographs hung. Some were faded, some cracked, but one stood out, a picture of the same underground station from decades ago. And in the corner of that old photograph was the same blurred figure, standing exactly where we had seen it in person. My chest tightened. This wasn't new. This wasn't even close to new. The figure had been appearing long before we found the camera, long before we developed the photograph, long before we stepped into that station. Junaid joined me, staring quietly at the framed image. Maybe it wasn't haunting us, he said softly. Maybe it needed us to see it, to pull it out. His words made sense in a strange, unsettling way. The station symbols, the glowing tunnel, the presence trying to form, the blurred shape becoming clearer each time. It all felt like something trying to cross a boundary. Not to harm us, but to finish something left undone. I walked back to the counter and picked up the photograph one more time. The figure's face wasn't threatening. If anything, it looked relieved, as if finally being seen had given a kind of closure. The hand on my shoulder wasn't tight, it was gentle, almost guiding. That's when I remembered something my father once told me when I was young. He said some photographs don't capture people, they capture moments that refuse to fade. Fragments of time that cling to the world, looking for a place to be understood. Maybe this figure was one of those fragments, caught between being forgotten and being remembered. The shop lights dimmed for a second, and a soft wind brushed past my ear, bringing the faint scent of dust and old paper. I turned, half expecting to see someone there, but the room was empty. Just as I was about to call out to Junaid, I noticed something new on the table beside the photo. A thin sheet of paper, newly printed, still warm to the touch. It was a second photograph. In this one, the station was completely empty. No glowing lights. No symbols. No figure. The place looked clean, quiet, almost ordinary. And at the bottom of the picture were 3 words. Thank you both. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The tension, the fear, the confusion, it all softened into something else. Understanding. This whole journey, from the abandoned station to the strange lights, had been a bridge, not a threat. A way for a lost presence to finally finish whatever it had been waiting for all these years. Maybe it had been trapped between moments, stuck in a loop of fading memories, and the photograph we developed had given a way out. We left the photo shop quietly, closing the door behind us even though we knew it hadn't been open in years. The lights inside faded as soon as we stepped outside, leaving the building dark again, like it had never woken up in the first place. For a moment, we stood there in the still night air, breathing slowly, letting the fear ease out of our bodies. The world felt normal again, more normal than it had in a long time. Walking home, everything looked sharper. The streetlights, the empty road, the soft sounds of the city settling into night. I realized how much I had taken the simple things for granted before all this happened. The safety of being unseen. The comfort of not knowing what's hidden behind the edges of reality. But this experience didn't leave me scared. It left me aware. Sometimes things appear when they're ready to be understood. Sometimes a mystery isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to show you something. A reminder that the world is bigger than what we see, and that not everything unknown is dangerous. Some things are just waiting for the right moment, the right people, or the right photograph to bring them into the light. When Junaid finally reached his street, he paused and looked at me the same way he had looked down in the station. Worried, uncertain, but trusting. "You think it's really over?" he asked. I nodded slowly. I think it ended the way it was supposed to. But as I walked home alone, I couldn't help glancing at my phone, half expecting a new notification or a strange picture to appear. Nothing showed up. Everything stayed ordinary. And yet, at the back of my mind, I felt something calm and distant, like a quiet presence stepping back into the shadows where it belonged. I placed the final printed photo on my desk when I got home. The empty station. The clean, quiet platform with no trace of lights or symbols or ghostly footsteps. Whenever I looked at it, I felt a sense of closure, a strange peace I couldn't fully explain. That night, just before sleeping, I checked the picture one last time. For a second, I thought I saw a faint blur in the corner, like a farewell gesture. But when I blinked, the space was empty again. And that's when I finally understood. The figure wasn't warning us. It wasn't haunting us. It was saying goodbye. Everything had come full circle. The photograph that once showed no one in it had finally been developed. And now, so had the story behind it.